We're going to talk about the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower and the election of 1952. Now, we told you that Truman decides not to run for re-election on the Democratic ticket because of the issues he had with General MacArthur and issues he also had with some of the things in Korea. So you have an interesting presidential race. Normally, a president will like to run for re-election. Very seldom do they choose not to if they can. And so what you have is kind of a wide open election. Both parties are going to have to get out and find candidates now that can win the election, because 99.9% of the time, if an incumbent president wants to run for re-election, they get the party's nomination. Now you have a president who has an opportunity to run for re-election who chooses not to in the somewhat modern age, and it brings a wide open election to the country. Now, during the 1952 presidential campaign, the Republican Party was split into two separate wings. You had the conservative wing of the Republican Party and the liberal wing of the Republican Party. If you look today in politics with the Republican Party, is there any kind of a split between conservatives and liberals? No, the Republicans are solidly conservative. And the Democrats at this time in history are solidly liberal. That's why we're in such partisan lines right now, is because there's such a difference in philosophy in 2018. Republicans conservative, Democrats liberal, Republicans call Democrats libtards. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on. It's just really kind of sad. Well, back in 1952, the Republican Party was actually split into two separate wings, the conservative wing of the Republican Party and the liberal wing. Well, Republican conservatives favored Mr. Republican, Senator Robert A. Taft of Ohio, for the nomination. We've talked about him quite a bit. He never has been able to pick up a nomination here, but he's in the running again in 1952 because conservative Republicans like him. So they're going to kind of lean towards Robert A. Taft of Ohio, Mr. Republican. The liberals within the Democratic Party favored General Dwight Eisenhower for the nomination. So you don't have a horrible split here, but you have a bit of a philosophical difference within the Republican Party, and the conservatives would rather have Senator Robert A. Taft of Ohio, and the liberals would rather favor General Dwight Eisenhower for the nomination. Now you got to remember that Eisenhower has like no political experience, right? He's a general, he's a military man. Does he know politics? Maybe a little bit, but he doesn't have any political experience, which would be unusual for this time. Actually, it was unusual all the way up to 2018. Well, after a pretty spirited Republican convention, Eisenhower was nominated for the presidency on the first ballot. So even though he doesn't have a lot of political experience, he's very popular because of his successes in World War II, and he will gain the nomination for president. Eisenhower then makes a bit of a surprise choice. He chooses California Senator Richard M. Nixon as his vice presidential running mate. And so you have Eisenhower, who was maybe a little bit up there in his years, and you have Eisenhower, who was a young kind of fire starter Republican senator from California. So on the Republican ticket in 52, you're going to have Dwight D. Eisenhower for president and California Senator Richard M. Nixon for vice president. Okay? Now with the Democratic Party, I'm going to introduce you to, I think, is a wonderful politician, a wonderful person that just has some really hard luck in politics concerning the presidency. So after a little bit of debate, the Democratic Party nominates Governor Adlai Stevenson of Illinois for the presidency and Senator John Sparkman of Alabama as his running mate. So they really balance the ticket. So the Democratic Party settles on Governor Adlai Stevenson of Illinois. And this is Adlai. We're on the board now. Here's Adlai Stevenson right here. Adlai Stevenson of Illinois. And John Sparkman will run as his vice presidential running mate. So again, after a little debate, the Democratic Party nominates Governor Adlai Stevenson of Illinois for the presidency, and Senator John Sparkin of Alabama. Adlai Stevenson is going to be quite a politician. We will talk a lot about him throughout the 1960s, and he's a crucial component of the Cuban Missile Crisis when he becomes ambassador to the United Nations. He's going to end up, we'll give you a preview, he's going to end up being a two-time loser in presidential elections, and really was a good politician. He's unfortunately going to run against Eisenhower twice. He's going to lose in 52 and he's going to lose in 56. So anyway, he's a good man, but never could get her done. Now, here are the 5 things that the Republican Party campaigned on. Usually you have a lot different campaign when you have a wide open election. So here are the 5 things that the Republican Party campaigned on. When they went out and campaigned for this election, number 1, they promised to clean up the, quote, political corruption within the Democratic Party during the Truman years. They promised to clean up the, quote, political corruption within the Democratic Party during the Truman years. The definition of political corruption, folks, has really changed from 1952 till today. Things that they would consider political corruption during the Truman years, you wouldn't even blink an eye at today. But anyway, they wanted to clean up the political corruption within the Democratic Party during the Truman years. Oh, you know, maybe the way that he treated General MacArthur, who was a Republican, I don't know. I mean, it was kind of, there wasn't too much specific. It wasn't like people were taking money and, I mean, it wasn't like real political corruption. It was just kind of a term that you know, things weren't right politically with Truman. Second thing they campaigned on, and they always say this, is the Republicans promised to, quote, clean up the mess in Washington from the Truman administration. To clean up the mess in Washington from the Truman administration.
Wasn't he a good president, though?
I think he was a great president. But I mean, you always got to campaign on something, right? No, that's basic. It's 2 different points. They're going to clean up political corruption. Then he's got the mess in Washington, according to the Republicans, Andrew, was more than just political corruption. Okay. One thing that they actually charged the Democratic Party with, this is number 3, during the Truman administration, is they believed that the Truman administration enlarged the powers of the federal government over state governments. In other words, they didn't give state governments enough say, that they put all the power of the government during the Truman years. Federal government was making decisions, state governments were limited in decisions they could make. And that's kind of an issue you could almost deal with. You know, a lot of people favor states' rights, right? That states have the right to make their own laws. For example, the law on whether marijuana should be legal or not is left by the federal government up to each state. So Colorado says yes, Wyoming says no, Montana says no, Washington says yes. That's the power of the state government. What they're complaining about here, the Republicans, and what they're going to change, is that during the Truman years, the federal government made all these decisions and didn't let the state governments have any say. Power of the federal government over power of the state government. Okay? What else might they accuse Truman of screwing up? The 4th thing. Close. Bungling up what?
Foreign affairs.
Well, what specifically? Bungling of screwing up what? What didn't he do a very good job in? Because it's not over. The Korean War. So they run on the campaign that, you know, Truman screwed up or bungled up the Korean War. Didn't get it done. Which takes us to the 5th thing they campaigned on, which is that if you elect Dwight D. Eisenhower, he'll do everything he can to end what? The Korean War, because it's not over yet, right? Truman's going to leave office before it's over. So the things that the Republican Party campaigned on in 1952 is they're going to clean up the political corruption within the Democratic Party during the Truman years. They're, number 2, going to clean up the mess in Washington from the Truman administration. They charged that the Democratic Party enlarged the powers of the federal government over the state governments during the time Truman was presidency. They accused the Truman administration of bungling up or screwing up the Korean War, and they promised the American people that if you elect Dwight D. Eisenhower, he will put an end to the conflict in Korea. That's what they're campaigning on. Isn't it always easy to campaign against a sitting president or a presidential administration? Because the Republicans haven't been maybe in office as much lately, the point being, so it's easy to criticize the other side when you haven't done anything yourself. Well, the Democrats, and it's always harder for the incumbent party to campaign on many issues because you can't criticize the other party for not doing anything because they haven't been in power, you see what I mean? So there were two things that the Democrats campaigned on. If you elect Adlai Stevenson, he will continue those fair deal programs that were so successful under the Truman administration. So they defend the fair deal, campaign on if you elect us. We will continue doing things like raising the minimum wage from 30 cents to 75 cents an hour. We will provide the GI Bill of Rights and help our veterans. So they're campaigning on the successes of the fair deal. And they don't really have anything else to campaign on, so they basically state, you know, be careful, watch what you wish for. This peace and prosperity and progress that the Republicans are promising you, that if they are elected isn't as easy to get as they're saying. They might give you lip service, and lip service is saying you're going to do something and not doing it. So they basically campaign on the fact that the fair deal was a good thing, helped Americans, will continue to do that, and don't listen to the Republicans on how easy it'll be to straighten up this so-called mess in Washington. A lot harder to straighten up problems once you're sitting in the driver's seat than if you're just sitting on the outside watching. Okay? So that's kind of how the campaign went. Well, on November 4th of 1952, Americans go to the polls to pick a new president, and here are the results. On November 4th of 1952, voters go to the polls, actually in record numbers. More people went to vote in this election than any election up to that point in American history. Very well attended, a lot of voters out there, they're interested. They want to pick a president, okay? Now, in popular vote, Caitlin, if you win, what's a good margin of popular vote? So you have all this popular vote percentage-wise. So if I have this and you have that, what would be a pretty good victory? That'd be awesome. I mean, that would be way awesome.
49.
Well, close, like 51-49 is a, you know, that's a pretty good victory popular vote-wise. You know what I'm saying? Okay. Well, if you get to, you know, if you get in the high 50s or you get, well, 60s, I mean, that's like impossible. But anyway, Eisenhower won 57%. Do I need to fix your pencil there? It seemed to be a little distracting for you. Okay, so Eisenhower gets 57% of the popular vote, which is an overwhelming amount of popular vote. Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote in the election of 2018 and loses the election with the Electoral College. So Eisenhower wins 57% of the popular vote. That's like a butt-kicking popular vote in an election. And usually when you win that kind of popular vote, don't you win by a large margin in the Electoral College as well? Well, in this case he did. He had 442 electoral votes and Stevenson only had 89. 442 to 89. So it was really a butt-kicking in general. Popular vote and electoral vote. It was a big victory for Eisenhower. Big-time victory. Now, what's Eisenhower's hope in this? We're going to have midterm elections here in November where you're voting for congressmen when you're not voting for a president. But this time, if it's a presidential election, you're also voting for members of Congress. So what's Eisenhower hoping happens with the election of 1952 in the Congress? Republicans will control. And fortunately for him, the Republican Party did manage to win control of Congress, which is always a benefit for a president. If the same party is running and winning that you are, you're going to get more done. So, as a result of the election of 1952, the Republican Party wins control of Congress and Dwight David Eisenhower becomes the nation's 34th president of the United States. This man right here, everybody loved Eisenhower, just like everybody's grandfather, honestly. Okay, with that said, we're going to talk about a ceasefire in Korea. Ceasefire in Korea. Well, as we mentioned, one of the campaign promises on the part of the Republican Party during the 1952 campaign was to end the war in Korea, or properly conflict, because it never really was legitimately a war. So they promised to do that. Well, kind of interesting, Eisenhower doesn't wait until he's inaugurated in as president. Okay, Truman is what we call a lame duck president. Once the election comes, he's just going to try to hang on and hopefully not do anything to upset the apple cart and let Eisenhower take over. So on December 17th of 1952, when's the president going to be inaugurated? Late January of 53. So before he's even inaugurated, and on December 17th of 1952, President-elect Eisenhower made a 3-day visit to Korea. So before his inauguration, when he was just what we call the President-elect, on December 17th of 1952, he makes a 3-day visit to Korea. And what he does is he sits down, to picture this, with both political and military leaders from both North Korea and South Korea. He sits down and has a conversation. And he does that at Panmunjom. If we're listening to Billy Joel's song, We Didn't Start the Fire, which we will, Panmunjom is in that song. And it refers to the meeting that Dwight Eisenhower had with military and political leaders from both North Korea and South Korea. And they met at Panmunjom. Well, Eisenhower was there. Guess who else was there?
Truman?
No,
Stevenson?
MacArthur. So he's bringing him back in the fold, right? Kind of interesting. So Eisenhower's there, General MacArthur's there, the North Korean president is there, the South Korean president Syngman Rhee is there, and the four men agree on a clear and definite solution to the conflict in Korea. So, at the meeting at Panmunjom is Eisenhower, the president-elect, General Douglas MacArthur, North Korean president, South Korean president Syngman Rhee, who's also in the Billy Joel song, and the four men agree on a clear and definite solution to the war. Okay? This is on December 17th, 18th, and 19th of 1952. Well, finally, 7 months later, on July 27th of 1953, now Eisenhower is president. On July 27th of 1953, Korea negotiates an agreement, and who do they sign it with? South Korea?
United States?
No, the United
Nations.
Nations, because it's fought under UN command, remember? So, on July 27th of 1953, 7 months after Eisenhower's meeting, North Korea and the United Nations signed an agreement. And here's what the agreement stated. Okay? So they signed an agreement. And who's it between? North Korea and the United Nations, not South Korea. Basically what it did is what we had from the start. The northern part of Korea would be under communist leadership, and the Republic of South Korea would be non-communist. Isn't that kind of where we were when we started this whole mess? Exactly, right? Now, again, the United States makes a commitment to the Republic of South Korea, and they state that we will defend your country against any further acts of aggression by communism. So we're really kind of back to where we were, are we not? Before the North Koreans made the move on South Korea in the first place. Now, it's kind of interesting. This was not like Vietnam, where people protested and we have all this concern about, we have a Korean War memorial, but we don't have a Korean wall with all the names of the soldiers killed. People took this a little better than they took the Vietnam conflict. Okay? But I think because of these numbers I'm going to give you, and the fact we didn't gain much in the Korean War, led to some of the feelings about Vietnam, people thinking, gee whiz, are we doing the same thing in Vietnam that we did in Korea?
Has the United States ever had Congress officially declare war since World War
That's a very good question. I do not believe so, you know. No, I think we've always went to other countries' aids. Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't believe so, no. Now, when I give you these statistics, can you maybe understand why people during the Vietnam era thought, gee whiz, are we getting into another Korea, okay? You know how many American soldiers were killed in Korea? By the way, the war lasted 3 years. It was on for 3 years. How many soldiers were killed in Vietnam? Anybody know? Approximately? 58,000 approximately. That's how many names are on the wall that you'll see. Well, by God, kids, there were 33,629 Americans killed in Korea. 33,629 killed in action. Now, that doesn't include what? Well, let's talk about killed in action. That doesn't include other countries that were involved, right? Including South Korea and all the other countries in the United Nations that chipped into this. We didn't go into great detail about the Korean War. But about 546,000 soldiers from the United Nations, including South Korea, were killed. 500,000 people killed in this conflict. So about 546,000 soldiers that fought under UN command, which would include the South Koreans, were killed. 500,000 people, more than 500,000. Now, this will kind of set up Vietnam. Guess how many North Korean soldiers were killed? We're looking at a total here of 546,000. That would include the 33,629 Americans. That would include South Korean soldiers, and also would include any other soldiers from any countries that fought under UN command. Guess how many North Korean soldiers were killed? 1.5 million. What does that tell you?
They made it all the way to...
Yeah, but what's it tell you though? Were they more willing to die? The Vietnam War is exactly the same. We cry, and we should, about 58,000 Americans killed in Vietnam. I won't tell you now, but wait till you see